Lila Carter sat at the grand dining table, her heart thumping like a drum against her ribs. The Weston family's chandelier glittered above, casting shards of light across the polished mahogany, but the warmth of the room couldn't touch the chill in her bones. Her father-in-law, Richard Weston, stood at the head of the table, his crystal wine glass raised high. His smirk was sharp, a blade hidden in velvet. "To Lila, my son's wife, who reminds us all that money can't buy elegance," he declared, his voice thick with mockery. The guests, draped in silk gowns and tailored suits, their faces carved from old money, laughed, a chorus of practiced amusement that echoed off the high ceilings. Lila's cheeks burned, but she held her chin steady, her smile tight as a drawn bowstring. Her mother-in-law, Evelyn, leaned forward, her diamond earrings catching the light like tiny stars. "Oh, darling," she purred, her words slicing through the air. "But money can certainly buy you a seat at our table." The laughter swelled again, sharp and cruel, like glass shattering in slow motion. Lila's hands, hidden beneath the table, clenched into fists, her nails biting into her palms. For 6 long years she'd endured their barbs, but tonight was different. The air crackled with something unspoken, a tension that made her pulse race. Then Ethan, the waiter, stepped into the light, his dark eyes calm but piercing. He cleared his throat and the room fell silent, as if the world held its breath. "Speaking of wine," he said, holding up a dusty bottle of Cabernet, "someone left a note inside this one from last year's gala." The laughter died. Every head turned, eyes wide with curiosity, confusion, and for some a flicker of fear. Lila's heart leapt. This was the moment she'd been waiting for, the spark that would set her truth ablaze. 6 years ago, Lila thought she'd found her happily ever after when she met David Weston. His warm brown eyes and easy laugh made her feel like she belonged, even though his family's world of wealth and status was as foreign to her as a distant planet. She'd grown up in a small town, where her dad fixed cars in a dusty garage and her mom baked pies for church fundraisers. David's love felt like a bridge between her world and his, but crossing it came with a price she hadn't anticipated. Their first family dinner was her initiation into the Weston family's unspoken rules. The invitation had said, "casual elegance," a phrase that sounded simple but was a trap. Lila had worn her best dress, a soft green one she'd saved months to buy, thinking it would impress them. But when she arrived at their sprawling mansion, Evelyn had taken one look and raised a perfectly arched eyebrow. "Oh, Lila, that's charming," she said, her voice dripping with pity. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable in the lounge with the children." David had laughed it off, calling his mother particular, but Lila caught the glance that passed between his parents, a look that said she was an intruder who'd wandered into their story uninvited. Richard was less subtle. Over cocktails, he asked about her job at the community center with a tone that made it sound like she was confessing to a crime. "A librarian? How quaint," he said, swirling his whiskey in a crystal tumbler. "It's noble to work for so little, I suppose." The word stung like a slap, but Lila smiled, hoping time would soften their judgment. That first dinner set the pattern for the next 6 years. Every Weston family event was a test she couldn't pass, with rules no one bothered to explain. Don't mention her family's blue-collar roots. Don't wear anything from a chain store. Don't ask for seconds at dinner. Don't expect to join their private jokes about people she'd never meet, like the senator they golfed with or the heiress they dined with in Paris. The annual holiday gala was a masterclass in exclusion. Evelyn seated Lila between David's ancient uncle, who mumbled into his soup, and a teenage cousin who spent the meal texting. While the family discussed their ski chalet in Aspen or their yacht in the Hamptons, Lila cut her roast into tiny pieces, feeling like she was shrinking with every bite. David tried to help once during dessert, his voice bright with effort. "Lila runs incredible programs at the community center," he said. "She's changing lives." The table went quiet, every head turning to her like she was a curiosity in a museum. Richard dabbed his mouth with a cloth napkin. Everything in their world was cloth, never paper, and gave her a pitying smile. "How charming," he said. "It must be so fulfilling to help those people." The emphasis on "those people" drew a clear line between Lila's world of hardworking families and their gilded one. She wanted to tell them about Sarah, a single mom who learned to read and got a promotion, or Tommy, a shy kid who found his voice through her storytelling workshops. Instead, she nodded and said, "It is." David squeezed her hand under the table, but his touch felt more like pity than protection. The engagement party was when Lila glimpsed the true depth of their contempt. Evelyn insisted on hosting, turning it into a spectacle of their wealth. Lila felt like a guest at her own celebration, watching Evelyn orchestrate every detail. The guest list, the champagne, the string quartet. She was a spectator in her own love story, reduced to a prop in their performance. Overhearing Evelyn in the kitchen was the moment her hope began to crack. "Use cream roses, not white," Evelyn told the florist, her voice low but sharp. "White's too pure for her, don't you think?" The florist's nervous laugh echoed in Lila's ears as she stood frozen in the hallway, clutching an empty glass. Her heart pounded, her stomach twisting. When Evelyn saw her, she didn't flinch. "Lila, darling, cream roses will suit your complexion so much better," she said, her smile as smooth as glass. Lila nodded, her throat tight, because she still believed she could prove herself if she tried harder. That night, she cried alone in her apartment, her tears soaking her pillow until it was heavy with grief. When she told David the next morning, he sighed, sitting on the edge of the bed, his shoulders slumped. "Mom's just old-fashioned," he said, avoiding her eyes. "She'll come around when she sees how much I love you." But Evelyn never did. The wedding planning only sharpened her cruelty, suggesting fewer guests for a refined event, dismissing Lila's family traditions as folksy, scheduling dress fittings when Lila couldn't get time off work. 2 weeks before the wedding, David presented a prenup, his face apologetic. "It's just standard legal stuff," he said, handing her a stack of papers thicker than a novel. "Dad's lawyer says it protects us both." Lila was exhausted, worn down by months of fighting to fit in, of smiling through Evelyn's barbs and Richard's condescension. She didn't hire her own lawyer. She couldn't afford one, and signed it, believing love would bridge the gap between her world and theirs. Richard watched her sign with a smile that made her skin crawl, like he just closed a deal in his favor. The wedding was breathtaking, orchids cascading from crystal vases, candlelight flickering across gold-rimmed plates, a string quartet playing Vivaldi. But as Lila walked down the aisle in her cream gown, past rows of strangers who smiled without warmth, she felt like an actor in someone else's fairy tale, not the bride in her own. For the first 3 years of marriage, Lila tried to adapt to their world. She shopped at the boutiques Evelyn recommended, even though the prices made her stomach churn. She wore the sapphire necklace Richard gave her for her birthday, its weight a constant reminder of their judgment. She learned to laugh at their jokes even when they stung. But the Westons never stopped reminding her she was an outsider. At their annual wine gala, a lavish affair where the elite sipped $1,000 bottles, Lila's hand shook as she poured a glass of red wine. A splash landed on Richard's pristine white jacket, the stain spreading like a wound. The room froze, every eye on her. "Careful, Lila," Richard said, his voice ablade. "That's an expensive mistake. Stick to water next time." The guests laughed, a choreographed sound that made her face burn. She apologized, offering to pay for cleaning, her voice trembling. Richard waved her off with a grand gesture, like a king dismissing a clumsy servant. Only Ethan, the waiter, didn't laugh. His dark eyes watched her with something unreadable. Pity, perhaps, or understanding. Later, as the guests moved to the patio for cigars and gossip, he approached with a folded napkin. "For your hands," he said softly. "They're shaking." Lila hadn't noticed until he pointed it out. That night, alone in her bedroom while David slept, she unfolded the napkin and found a note in careful script. "Check the bottle next year." She tucked it into her jewelry box, a secret she didn't understand but felt was vital, like a key to a lock she hadn't yet found. The next 3 years were a slow, grinding battle. Lila and David moved into a sleek condo in the city, paid for by his parents, but it felt like another stage for their scrutiny. Evelyn visited often, rearranging furniture and commenting on Lila's simplistic decorating taste. "You could use more color, dear," she'd say, her smile tight, as if Lila's choices were a personal affront. Richard invited them to exclusive events, charity auctions, opera openings, but always introduced her as David's wife, never by name, as if she were an accessory rather than a person. At a gala for a children's hospital, Lila overheard Evelyn telling a friend, "She's sweet, but so ordinary. David could have done so much better." The words cut deep, but Lila kept her smile in place, playing the role of the grateful daughter-in-law. Her work at the community center became her sanctuary, the one place where she felt whole. She expanded her literacy program, helping people like Maria, a grandmother who read her first book at 65 and cried with joy, or Jamal, a teenager who discovered poetry and began writing his own. These victories kept her afloat, even as David grew distant, caught between his family's expectations and his fading loyalty to her. The napkin's message haunted Lila. Late at night, when the condo was quiet, she'd take it out of her jewelry box, tracing the words with her finger. Check the bottle next year. It felt like a promise, a whisper of justice in a world that had offered her none. But another mystery began to unfold. Strange letters started arriving at the condo, addressed to Lila in sharp, unfamiliar handwriting. They were cryptic, unsettling. "The truth is closer than you think," one read. Another said, "Watch the shadows behind you." A third, slipped under the door, warned, "They're not what they seem." Lila's stomach twisted each time she opened one, but she didn't tell David. He dismissed them as pranks or accused her of being paranoid. She hid them in a locked drawer, sensing they were part of the puzzle she was piecing together, threads of a larger truth. As the 6th wine gala approached, Lila's resolve hardened. She'd spent 3 years enduring dinners, galas, and subtle humiliations, smiling through Evelyn's barbs and Richard's condescension. She and David argued more about his parents, about her sensitivity, about the life they were supposed to build together. "Why can't you just let it go?" he'd snap when she mentioned Evelyn's latest insult. "They're my family, Lila. They're not going to change." Lila stopped arguing, saving her energy for the moment she knew was coming. She began to plan in secret, her mind sharp with purpose. The mysterious letters fueled her determination, each one a reminder that someone out there knew the Weston's secrets and wanted her to uncover them. The night of the 6th wine gala felt electric from the moment Lila stepped into the Weston's mansion. The air was thick with the scent of roses and candle wax, the rooms alive with the hum of wealth. Ethan was there, arranging wine glasses on the sideboard with his usual quiet precision. Their eyes met and his brief nod sent a jolt through her, a signal that the plan was in motion. During the appetizer course, as Evelyn droned on about her latest charity committee drama, Ethan leaned close to refill Lila's water glass. His voice was barely a whisper, meant only for her. "The Cabernet from last year. I kept it safe." Lila's pulse raced. The napkin's message clicked into place, its meaning suddenly clear. Whatever truth was hidden in that bottle was about to change everything. Dinner unfolded with the familiar rhythm of Weston gatherings. Evelyn held court, regaling the table with tales of her charity work, emphasizing how exhausting it was to deal with lesser minds who didn't understand proper etiquette. Richard dominated the main course, boasting about a recent business acquisition, name-dropping clients and competitors with the ease of a man who'd never been told no. David contributed just enough to keep his parents satisfied, but Lila noticed his glances her way, as if he sensed something different in her tonight. She wasn't shrinking into her chair, wasn't apologizing for existing. For the first time in 6 years, she sat at their table with a quiet strength, her eyes sharp, her hands steady. She felt like a chess player poised to deliver checkmate, every move calculated, every piece in place. When Richard stood to make his traditional toast, Lila's heart thundered in her chest. "To Lila," he said, his voice thick with scorn, his glass raised like a weapon. "Proof that money can't buy grace." The guests laughed, their amusement a rehearsed performance. Evelyn couldn't resist adding her own flourish. "But it can buy a chair at our table, dear," she said, her smile a venomous curl. David's jaw tightened, his knuckles white on his wine glass, as if he was finally hearing the cruelty woven into their words. Lila didn't flinch. She met their gazes steadily, her heart a drumbeat of anticipation. Then Ethan stepped forward, holding the Cabernet bottle like a sacred relic. "Before we move on," he said, his voice cutting through the room like a blade, "there's a note inside this bottle from last year's gala." The silence was absolute, the kind that comes before a storm. Every face turned to him, expressions ranging from confusion to curiosity to something darker. Fear, perhaps, in Richard's eyes. Ethan reached into the bottle's neck and withdrew a folded paper, his movements slow and deliberate, as if handling evidence in a courtroom. "It's addressed to the bride who deserves the truth," he said, handing it to Lila. Her fingers were steady as she took it, but her heart was a wildfire, burning with the weight of the moment. The note was from Marcus Reed, Richard's former lawyer. Its words were a grenade, shattering the room's fragile pretense. "Richard Weston altered your prenuptial agreement after you reviewed it. The original protected your financial rights and ensured shared access to marital assets. The version you signed removed those protections and designated Richard as the primary beneficiary of David's trust fund in the event of divorce or death. I can no longer remain silent about this deception." Lila's breath caught, the full scope of Richard's betrayal crystallizing in her mind. He hadn't just mocked her. He'd planned her downfall from the start, ensuring she'd leave the marriage with nothing, while he secured his son's wealth for himself. She looked up to see Richard's face drain of color, his glass trembling in his hand. Evelyn's mouth hung open, her composure shattered. David stared at the table, his expression a mix of shock and dawning horror, as if his world had just tilted off its axis. "Guess money can't buy honesty either," Lila said, her voice calm but sharp as a scalpel. Richard's hand shook, and his wine glass tipped, spilling red across the white tablecloth like blood from an open wound. But Lila wasn't finished. She reached into her purse with deliberate slowness, savoring the way Richard's eyes followed her every move, the way Evelyn leaned forward despite herself, desperate to understand what was happening to her carefully curated world. She pulled out a thick manila envelope, its edges worn from months of careful handling. "Since we're sharing secrets tonight," she said, her voice ringing with quiet authority, "I have a few of my own." She placed a set of papers on the table, the header unmistakable: "Petition for dissolution of marriage." "Divorce papers," she announced, her tone conversational as if discussing the weather. "Signed, filed, and processed as of yesterday afternoon." David's fork clattered against his plate, the sound breaking the spell of silence. Evelyn lurched forward, grabbing the document, her perfectly manicured nails scraping the paper. Richard pushed back from the table so hard his chair nearly toppled, his face a mask of panic. David just sat there, his expression cycling through shock, betrayal, and something like regret, too fast for Lila to read. She wasn't done. Reaching into the envelope again, she withdrew a second set of papers, thinner but heavier with implication. "This is the original prenup," she said, handing it to David. "The one you showed me 6 months before our wedding. Notice the date stamp and the law firm's seal." David's hands trembled as he unfolded it, his eyes scanning the clauses that had once promised fairness, protections for both of them as partners. Lila continued, her voice steady despite the chaos erupting around her. "This is the version that treated me like a partner, not a threat. The version your father made disappear." Marcus annotated the differences in red ink. Every clause altered, every protection removed, every way Richard ensured I'd walk away with nothing if our marriage ended. David's face darkened, his breath coming in short, angry bursts as he compared the documents. Then came the final blow, the one Lila had saved for maximum impact. She pulled out a stack of bank statements, their numbers telling a story no amount of Richard's charm could erase. "Your trust fund balance," she said, placing them in front of David. "Current amount versus what it should be, based on your grandfather's original bequest and accumulated interest." The figures were damning. Regular withdrawals always just under the reporting threshold, siphoned off through business expenses that matched Richard's luxury purchases. A sports car, a private jet lease, gambling trips to Vegas and Atlantic City. "Your father stole $3.2 million from you over the past 6 years, Lila said, her voice unwavering. "The dates line up perfectly with his business trips. Turns out, casinos keep very thorough records when you know where to look." David's face went through a spectrum of colors, white with shock, green with nausea, then a dangerous shade of red. When he looked at his father, his voice was a barely controlled whisper, each word a blade. "You stole from me. From your own son." Richard's mouth opened and closed, his usual eloquence failing him. For the first time in Lila's memory, the great orator was speechless. But Lila had one more card to play, a twist she'd uncovered only weeks before. She pulled out a third set of documents, letters from Marcus, detailing Evelyn's complicity in the prenup scam. "Your mother knew," Lila said, her gaze locking onto Evelyn's wide, panicked eyes. She helped plan it, laughing behind closed doors about how easy it was to fool me. She even suggested the wording for some of the clauses. Didn't you, Evelyn? Evelyn's gasp was audible, her hand flying to her chest as if struck. Her composure, so carefully maintained, cracked like porcelain under a hammer. That's a lie, she whispered, but her voice trembled, betraying her. Lila placed the letters on the table, their notarized signatures unmistakable. Marcus kept records of everything, she said. Every meeting, every phone call, every smirk you shared when you thought no one was listening. The room was a tableau of devastation. Richard's face was ashen, his hands gripping the table's edge as if to keep himself upright. Evelyn sat frozen, her social mask shattered, her eyes darting between the papers and her husband. David looked at his parents like they were strangers, his world unraveling thread by thread. The guests, usually so quick to laugh, were silent, their faces a mix of shock and morbid fascination. Lila stood slowly, slipping on her coat with the calm of someone who just won a long, brutal war. You treated me like I didn't belong at your table, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. But you, Richard, treated your own son like he was nothing. And you, Evelyn, played along, thinking your perfect world was untouchable. I never wanted your money. I just wanted to be treated like a human being. But you couldn't even manage that. She turned to David, whose eyes were wet with unshed tears. I'm sorry you had to learn this way, she said softly. But I needed you to see the truth, all of it. With that, she walked to the dining room doorway, pausing for one final look at the wreckage she'd left behind. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked loudly, marking the end of an era. Lila stepped into the cool October night, leaving the Westons to drown in their silence. 6 months earlier, a phone call had set this chain of events in motion. Lila was at the community center, sorting books for her literacy program, when her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. Is this Lila Carter? The voice asked, cautious but urgent. My name is Marcus Reed. I'm Richard Weston's former lawyer. I have something you need to see. Her first instinct was to hang up. Mysterious calls rarely brought good news, but something in his tone stopped her. They agreed to meet at a small diner across town, far from the Westons' glittering world. The diner was cozy with mismatched chairs and chipped mugs, a place that valued substance over appearance, the opposite of everything the Westons stood for. Marcus was easy to spot. Mid-50s, graying hair, a suit that had seen better days. He looked like a man whose conscience was costing him sleep. Mrs. Carter, he said, standing as she approached, his hand trembling slightly as he offered it. Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would. Lila sat across from him, her purse clutched in her lap, every nerve on edge. What's this about, Mr. Reed? She asked, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Instead of answering directly, Marcus pulled a manila folder from his briefcase and placed it between them. The tab was labeled with her name and wedding date, a sight that made her stomach clench. I represented Richard for 15 years, he began, his voice low. I handled his business contracts, estate planning, family legal matters, including your prenuptial agreement. The mention of the prenup made Lila shift uncomfortably. She'd signed it in a haze of exhaustion, trusting David's assurances that it was routine. Marcus opened the folder, his movements careful like someone handling evidence. 3 weeks before your wedding, Richard asked me to make some modifications, he said. He said there'd been family discussions about asset protection. At the time I thought it was standard. Rich families protect their wealth, nothing unusual. He slid a document across the table, and Lila recognized it immediately. The original prenup draft David had shown her months before the wedding, the one that had seemed fair, with clauses protecting both their interests. This is what you originally agreed to, Marcus said. Notice the provisions for shared assets, spousal support, your separate property. Lila nodded, remembering the relief she'd felt reading those protections, how they'd made her believe the Westons respected her independence. Then Marcus placed a second document beside the first. This is what you actually signed, he said. The differences were stark, even to her untrained eye. Entire paragraphs had been rewritten, protections erased, terms that benefited her replaced with language that left her vulnerable. He changed it, Lila breathed, the betrayal hitting her like a wave. He changed it and backdated the modifications to make it look like they'd been there all along. Marcus nodded, his expression grim. He called it a clerical correction. I went along with it because I'd done worse for him over the years. But last month, I was at a charity auction with my wife. Richard was there, holding court with his usual crowd. Marcus's voice grew bitter. I overheard him talking about you, laughing about how easy it was to protect the family legacy from what he called fortune hunters. He bragged about outwitting you, said you were too naive to read the fine print, too grateful to question anything. The words landed like punches, each one fueling Lila's anger. That's when I knew I had to act, Marcus said, sliding a notarized confession across the table. I wrote this detailing exactly what Richard asked me to do. It's signed, witnessed, and notarized. But I needed somewhere safe to keep it, somewhere Richard would never look. The wine bottle, Lila said, the pieces clicking into place. Marcus managed a faint smile. My cousin Ethan works catering for their events. He's a law student, knows the importance of evidence preservation. He suggested hiding the confession where Richard would never think to check, right under his nose at his own gala. The elegance of the plan was breathtaking. Using Richard's arrogance against him, hiding the truth in plain sight while he celebrated his supposed victory. But there's more, Marcus said, his expression darkening. The prenup wasn't the only thing Richard manipulated. He pulled out a thick folder of bank statements, transaction records, and financial documents. David's trust fund, he said. Richard's been siphoning it for years, small withdrawals, buried in fake business expenses, always just under the reporting threshold. It adds up to $3.2 million, most of it spent on gambling trips and luxury purchases. Lila stared at the evidence, overwhelmed by the scale of Richard's betrayal, not just of her but of his own son. I copied everything, Marcus said. Every falsified report, every fake transaction, every dollar he stole. If I was going to burn my career, I wanted to do it thoroughly. Lila asked the question that had been burning in her mind. Why? Why risk everything for me? Marcus looked into his coffee cup, his voice quiet but firm. Because watching good people get crushed by powerful ones is how evil wins. And because I have a daughter your age. I'd hope someone would help her if she needed it. They spent 2 hours going through the documents, Marcus explaining the legal implications, helping Lila understand the depth of Richard's crimes. By the time they parted, she had enough evidence to dismantle the Weston family's empire. But the cryptic letters she'd received added another layer of mystery. Marcus admitted to sending them, testing her resolve, ensuring she was ready to face the Westons. I needed to know you wouldn't back down, he said. Lila left the diner with the folder tucked in her purse, her mind racing but her heart steady with a new emotion. Hope. Not hope that the Westons would change, but hope that she finally had the power to fight back. Over the next 6 months, Lila prepared in secret. She hired Patricia Lane, a lawyer specializing in financial fraud within marriages, recommended by a colleague at the community center. Patricia was fierce, her office cluttered with case files and coffee mugs, her eyes sharp with determination. Together, they built a case that would protect Lila and expose Richard's crimes. Lila kept it hidden from David, knowing he'd try to mediate, to smooth things over with his parents. The mysterious letters continued, each one more pointed. The Queen knows more than you think. One read, hinting at Evelyn's involvement. Another said, the sun is blind but not forever. Lila began to suspect they weren't all from Marcus. Someone else was watching, someone with their own reasons to see the Westons fall. As the gala approached, Lila's resolve grew ironclad. She chose her outfit with the precision of a general selecting armor. A black dress Evelyn had once complimented, its elegance understated but undeniable. She wore the sapphire necklace Richard had given her, its weight a reminder of the role she'd played for too long. Even her lipstick was chosen for its staying power. She intended to look flawless when she delivered her final performance. David was already dressed when she emerged from their bathroom, adjusting his tie in the bedroom mirror. He looked handsome in his navy suit, chosen by Evelyn, like everything in their life bore her fingerprints. You look beautiful, he said, kissing her cheek, a gesture so practiced it felt hollow. Thank you, Lila replied, letting him help with her necklace's clasp. His fingers were warm against her neck, and for a moment she felt a pang of regret. David wasn't cruel like his father or vicious like his mother. He was just weak, and weakness she'd learned could be as destructive as malice. The drive to the Westons' estate took 27 minutes, the same route they'd traveled dozens of times. David made small talk about his day at the law firm, mentioning a case that reminded him of his father's work. Lila nodded, her responses automatic, her mind rehearsing the evening ahead. The mansion loomed as they approached, its windows glowing like eyes, its stone facade imposing. The circular driveway was filled with familiar cars, Richard's Mercedes, Evelyn's BMW, and the catering van that meant Ethan was here. Lila's pulse quickened at the sight. Everything depended on him, on the bottle being where Marcus promised, on the plan unfolding perfectly. One misstep could unravel months of preparation. "Ready?" David asked, offering his arm as they approached the front door. "More than you know," Lila said, and he laughed, thinking it was a joke. Evelyn greeted them in the foyer with her usual theatrical warmth, air-kissing Lila's cheeks without touching her. "Melissa, darling, that dress is stunning," she said, her smile laced with a barb. "So slimming." The word lingered, a reminder of Evelyn's past suggestion that Lila lose weight before their wedding photos. "Thank you, Evelyn," Lila said, her voice smooth. "You look radiant as always." The lies came easily now, honed by years of practice. Richard emerged from his study, a crystal tumbler of whiskey in hand, his face already flushed from his first drink. He was always more tolerable after one, more dangerous after three. Tonight, Lila was counting on him hitting that sweet spot where confidence tipped into arrogance. "There's my favorite daughter-in-law," he boomed, as if she weren't his only one. The joke was tired, but Lila submitted to his one-armed hug, breathing in the scent of expensive cologne and aged bourbon. "Good evening, Richard," she said. "Thank you for having us." The dining room was a vision of Evelyn's meticulous taste. Fresh roses from her greenhouse, candles costing more than most people's groceries, place settings that could fund a small charity. Ethan moved through the space with professional grace, arranging glasses and checking wine bottles. When their eyes met, he gave the slightest nod, a signal that sent a thrill through Lila. Dinner proceeded with the familiar rhythm of Weston gatherings. Evelyn held court, sharing a story about a charity committee member who'd suggested silk flowers for their autumn gala. A suggestion she'd rejected with righteous indignation. "Can you imagine?" she said, gesturing with her wine glass. "Silk flowers at a $500 plate dinner. The woman has no sense of atmosphere." Lila made the appropriate noises of agreement, her mind calculating how many literacy programs could be funded with the cost of this one meal. Richard dominated the main course, boasting about a recent acquisition, name-dropping clients with the ease of a man who'd never been challenged. David contributed just enough to avoid disapproval, but Lila caught his glances, his brow furrowing as if he sensed something off. Dessert arrived with Evelyn's usual commentary about calories and indulgence. She served herself a sliver of chocolate torte, joking about her personal trainer's reaction to her weakness for sweets. Everything was performance with her, even her relationship with food. As the meal wound down, Lila's heartbeat accelerated. The moment was coming, when Ethan would retrieve the bottle, when Marcus's confession would see light, when 6 years of swallowed pride would find their voice. Richard stood for his toast, swaying slightly from the wine and whiskey he'd consumed. This was his favorite moment, when he could hold court and deliver his cutting observations. "To Lila," he began, his voice a mocking caress. "Proof that money can't buy grace." The guests laughed and Evelyn added, "But it can buy a chair at our table, dear." David's grip on his glass tightened, his jaw clenched, a sign he was finally hearing the venom in their words. Ethan stepped forward, the Cabernet bottle in his hands, its label worn but legible. "Before we move on," he said, his voice steady, "there's a note in this bottle from last year's gala." The silence was electric, every eye on him. He pulled out the folded paper, his movements deliberate, and read, "To the bride who deserves the truth." He handed it to Lila, and as she opened it, the room seemed to hold its breath. Marcus's words burned into her mind, each one a spark igniting her resolve. When she spoke, her voice was calm but lethal. "Guess money can't buy honesty," she said, watching Richard's world begin to crumble. The divorce papers, the original prenup, the bank statements, Evelyn's complicity. She laid them out like a royal flush, each revelation more devastating than the last. David's rage, Richard's silence, Evelyn's shock. It was a symphony of justice, conducted by Lila's steady hand. As she walked out, the cold October air stung her lungs, cleansing her of 6 years of pretense. She didn't go home to the condo but to her friend Anna's house, where a porch light glowed like a beacon. Anna opened the door before Lila could knock. "You did it, didn't you?" she asked, her eyes wide. Lila held up the envelope. "It's over." They sat by the fire, wine in hand, as Lila recounted the night her life changed. Anna listened, her face shifting from shock to pride. "You were magnificent," she said, pulling Lila into a hug that melted the last of her tension. The next 3 years were a rebirth. Lila moved into a cozy apartment near the community center, decorating it with books, bright quilts, and photos of her students. She expanded her programs, starting a mentorship for teens inspired by her own journey. David filed fraud charges against his father, and the Westons' reputation collapsed. Richard's deals dried up, and Evelyn's charity events became whispered scandals. David texted once, his words raw with regret. "I failed you, Lila. I'm sorry for everything." She didn't respond. His pain was real, but it wasn't her burden. Lila's life became her own. She hosted dinners with Anna and her community center friends, laughing over cheap wine and homemade meals. One evening Ethan visited, now a lawyer. "You took down the Westons," he said, raising a glass. "To the truth," Lila replied, clinking hers against his. But a new twist emerged. A letter arrived in Evelyn's handwriting. "You think you've won, but secrets cut both ways," it read, enclosing a photo of Lila from years ago, meeting a man in a cafe, a brief fling before David. The note hinted at a scandal Evelyn planned to leak. Lila's heart raced, but she smiled. She'd learned to fight fire with fire. Calling Patricia, she began planning her next move, ready to protect her new life. Months later, another letter arrived, this time anonymous. "The son seeks redemption." Lila's breath caught. David was reaching out, not to reconcile, but to offer evidence of Richard's other crimes, hidden in offshore accounts. She met him in secret, his face older, his eyes haunted. "I owe you this," he said, handing her a flash drive. Lila took it, knowing this wasn't closure but a new chapter in her fight. As she looked out her window at the city lights, Lila knew she'd found her place. Not at a table she begged for, but in a life she'd built, stronger than ever, ready for whatever came next.